We moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood about 5 years ago. It seemed like the perfect place to start fresh. Big yards, friendly faces, and a community that felt safe. Our house was modest but comfortable, and I poured every ounce of energy into making it a home. Samantha claimed she wanted to focus on creating a warm and loving space for us while I worked hard to provide. I didn't mind. I wanted her to have the freedom to pursue whatever made her happy. Back then, I trusted her completely. Life seemed perfect, or so I thought. Sure, there were little things that bothered me, like how Samantha would sometimes dismiss my long hours, or how she never seemed to appreciate the sacrifices I made. But I told myself it was normal. No relationship is flawless, right? Enter Brad, our next-door neighbor. From the moment we met, I knew he was trouble. The guy reeked of arrogance, always strutting around shirtless, showing off his muscles, and revving his obnoxiously loud car like he was some kind of big shot. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed to love him, though. He was the guy who threw barbecues, cracked jokes, and acted like he owned the block. But to me, he was just a loudmouth with a superiority complex. Brad and I never really clicked, which wasn't surprising. I'm the quiet, get-things-done type, while Brad seemed to live for attention. Samantha, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy his antics. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was sociable and friendly, and I figured she was just being polite. But looking back, there were signs I should have noticed. Things started to shift a few months ago. Samantha suddenly got into fitness, claiming she wanted to feel healthier. She began dressing up more often, even when she wasn't going anywhere special. Then there were her constant visits to Brad's house, always with some excuse about borrowing tools or discussing neighborhood events. She laughed at his jokes a little too hard, lingered a little too long. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. After all, Samantha loved me, didn't she? I shrugged it off, telling myself Brad was just a harmless show-off. But deep down, something didn't feel right. It's hard to explain that gut feeling, like a storm brewing on the horizon, quiet but unmistakable. I ignored it, though. I mean, what kind of husband doubts his wife over something so trivial? It felt wrong to question her, like I was betraying the trust we'd built. So I buried my suspicions, convincing myself I was overthinking. After all, I had a good life, a stable job, a wife I loved. Why would I want to mess that up with baseless accusations? But looking back, that was my first mistake. Trusting too easily, ignoring the cracks forming in the perfect facade. Little did I know, the storm wasn't just brewing, it was about to hit. And when it did, it would leave nothing in its wake but shattered trust and rage I never thought I was capable of. If only I had known then what I know now. If only. But life doesn't give you warnings. It just drops you into the chaos and expects you to swim or drown. Suspicion has a way of gnawing at your mind, like a relentless itch you can't quite scratch. Once you start noticing things, you can't unsee them. And for me, it was no different. Samantha's newfound fitness obsession was one thing, but it wasn't just her gym routines or the fact that she suddenly cared about makeup when she had never bothered before. It was the subtle shifts, the hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, the overly enthusiastic laughs when Brad cracked his juvenile jokes, and of course, her frequent visits next door. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was innocent. But when Samantha started coming home later and later, with flimsy excuses like losing track of time while chatting, my alarm bells grew louder. One night, I worked late, another 12-hour shift to cover mounting bills, and came home to find Samantha sitting on the couch, phone in hand, giggling at something she quickly dismissed as a silly meme. Except the glow in her eyes wasn't for me. It wasn't even for the screen. It was for whoever was on the other end of that text. I told myself to let it go, but the doubts wouldn't let me sleep. By morning, I knew I had to do something. The gut feeling had grown into a storm of unease, and it wasn't going away until I had answers. So I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make in my marriage. I installed a camera. Nothing fancy, just a small device hidden in the corner of the living room. I hated myself for doing it. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her trust. But deep down, I knew something was already broken. I just didn't want to admit it. The first few days, the footage was uneventful. Samantha spent most of her time on the couch, scrolling through her phone or watching TV. But on the third day, while I was at work, something happened. Brad came over. At first, it was innocent enough. He brought over some mail that had been accidentally delivered to his house. They laughed and talked, and I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than friendly, neighborly banter. But then he stayed, and stayed. The footage showed them sitting closer and closer, their laughter becoming more intimate, their body language more familiar. By the end of it, Brad was leaning in, touching her arm, and Samantha wasn't pulling away. If anything, she welcomed it. I clenched my fists as I watched the screen, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not to us. But the evidence was right there, staring back at me. It wasn't just a casual conversation or an innocent laugh. It was chemistry, attraction, betrayal. Still, I held on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, that I was being paranoid. That night, I confronted Samantha. I told her I had a feeling something wasn't right, that I'd noticed the time she spent with Brad. She looked at me wide-eyed and defensive, calling me paranoid. She said I was imagining things, that I was tired from working too much, and that Brad was just a nice guy. I wanted to believe her, but the camera didn't lie. I didn't tell her about it. Not yet. Instead, I asked why she had been spending so much time with him. She deflected, saying she was lonely because I was always at work. That stung more than I expected. Was she blaming me? Was this my fault? The breaking point came a week later. I checked the footage again, this time more determined than ever to uncover the truth. What I saw shattered me. Brad was in my house, sitting on my couch, leaning in to kiss my wife, and she let him. The rage that followed was like nothing I'd ever felt before. My hands shook, my vision blurred, and my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out every rational thought. The woman I loved, the woman I sacrificed for, was betraying me under my own roof. And Brad, he had the audacity to walk into my house like he owned it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a cheating wife. This was about respect. Respect I wasn't getting, respect I damn well deserved. Something inside me snapped, and from that moment on, I knew I couldn't sit back and let this continue. Samantha and Brad had crossed the line, and they were about to find out what happens when you push a man too far. The thing about betrayal is that it's not just the act itself, it's the aftermath. The slow unraveling of everything you once believed. For days after I saw the footage, I felt like I was sleepwalking through my life. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and watch Samantha pretend that everything was fine. I couldn't look at her without feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak, but I knew I needed to confront her. The only question was how. One evening after dinner, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, like nothing was wrong. I stood there, just staring at her, wondering how she could look so carefree when she had shattered my trust into a million pieces. "Samantha," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "We need to talk." She glanced up, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she already sensed where this was going. "What's wrong?" she asked, feigning concern. I took a deep breath. "I know about you and Brad." Her face froze for a moment, and in that brief hesitation, I saw the truth. She knew. She'd been caught. But then, just as quickly, she shifted into defense mode. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice rising. "Brad and I are just friends. You're being ridiculous." I reached for my phone, pulled up the footage, and handed it to her. Her expression shifted from defiance to shock as she watched herself with Brad. The way he touched her, the way she smiled at him, it was all there, undeniable. When the video ended, she put the phone down and looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't insult me, Samantha," I snapped. "I saw everything. You let him into our house. You let him touch you. Don't stand there and act like this is some misunderstanding." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. At first, I felt a pang of guilt, an instinctive reaction to seeing someone I loved in pain. But that guilt quickly turned to anger. She wasn't the victim here. I was. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said through her tears. "I was lonely. You're always working, and Brad, he made me feel special." "Special?" I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. "I work 12-hour days to give you everything you want, and you feel special with Brad? Do you even hear yourself?" Her tears didn't stop, but neither did my questions. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "How many times have you been with him?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "A few months," she admitted quietly. "But it wasn't serious. It was just, I don't know, a distraction. A distraction? I repeated, the words cutting into me like a knife. You call betraying your husband a distraction? She tried to defend herself, to shift the blame onto me. You've been so distant, she said. You're always tired, always working. I needed someone to talk to. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Don't you dare make this about me, I said, my voice rising. I worked hard for us, Samantha. I trusted you, and this is how you repay me. Her tears turned to anger. Then you're not perfect either, she shot back. You've been so wrapped up in work, you didn't even notice how unhappy I've been. Unhappy, I said, my voice trembling with rage. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. But instead, you went behind my back and invited that smug bastard into our home. You made a fool out of me. The argument escalated, our voices echoing through the house. Every word she said only fueled my anger, and every tear she shed felt like an attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. But I couldn't. Not anymore. By the end of it, I realized something crucial. Samantha wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. And as I stood there, watching her try to justify the unjustifiable, I felt something inside me harden. The love I once felt for her was still there, but it was buried beneath layers of hurt and anger. That night, I slept in the guest room, or at least I tried to sleep. Sleep didn't come easily, not with my mind racing and my heart aching. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for certain. Brad had to pay. And so did Samantha. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me, not anymore. You never really know what you're capable of until someone pushes you too far. That's exactly what Brad did the night he had the audacity to show up at my doorstep like he owned the place. I had been stewing in my own frustration and humiliation for days, trying to figure out how to handle the situation with Samantha. When the knock came, it was late, past 10. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened the door cautiously, and there he was, Brad, standing on my porch, his smug face illuminated by the glow of the porch light. He didn't even have the decency to look sheepish or apologetic. No, he looked as cocky as ever, like he had every right to be there. What do you want? I asked, my voice cold and sharp. Brad smirked, leaning casually against the door frame like we were old buddies. We need to talk, he said, as though this was some casual misunderstanding we could iron out over a beer. I didn't move. I don't think we do, I replied, my hand tightening on the edge of the door. But he wasn't taking no for an answer. He pushed past me, stepping into my house without an invitation. My house. The place I worked my ass off to build. The place where he had no right to be. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I held it back. Not yet. Brad turned to face me, his posture oozing confidence. Look, he began. I get it, you're upset. I mean, who wouldn't be? But you've got to understand, Samantha came to me. This isn't all on me, man. Man. Asterisk, he called me man, like we were equals, like this was some casual disagreement instead of the complete destruction of my marriage. I clenched my fists, but I kept my voice steady. Get out of my house, I said firmly. He ignored me, walking further into the living room like he belonged there. You've got to face facts, he continued. Your marriage is over. Samantha's not happy with you. She's happier with me. I took a step toward him, my blood boiling. I said, get out. But he wasn't done. You're holding her back, he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. She deserves better than some guy who's always working, always tired. She needs someone who can give her attention, make her feel alive. And that's me. That was it. The last straw. I felt something snap inside me. I stepped closer, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. You think you can walk into my house, insult me, and act like you're some kind of hero? You don't know the first thing about being a man. Brad laughed, an infuriating sound that made my skin crawl. Oh, come on, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just let her go, move on. Hell, I'm sure you'll find someone eventually. The audacity of this man was staggering. He was standing in my living room, telling me to give up my wife, my life, like I was some obstacle in his way. I could feel my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took to hold myself back. But then he made his biggest mistake. Brad stepped closer, invading my space, and jabbed a finger at my chest. Listen, he said, his tone low and threatening. You're out of your league here. You don't want to make me your enemy. It was like a switch flipped. All the anger, the humiliation, the heartbreak, It all came rushing to the surface in one explosive moment. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it sharply, and shoved him backward. He stumbled, his cocky demeanor replaced with a flash of surprise. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "I've had enough of you," I growled, advancing on him. "Enough of your arrogance, your disrespect, your lies." Brad tried to shove me back, but he underestimated me. He thought I was weak, thought I'd back down. He was wrong. I grabbed his arm again, twisting it with enough force to make him cry out in pain. "You think you're untouchable?" I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You think you can walk into my house and bully me?" He struggled, but I held firm, pushing him to his knees. "You're nothing," I spat, the words spilling out like venom. Just a pathetic excuse for a man who preys on other people's lives because he has nothing of his own. With one final twist, I heard the sickening crack of his wrist. Brad screamed, clutching his hand as he fell to the floor. I stood over him, breathing heavy, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of control, a sense of power. This was my house, my life, and no one, least of all Brad, was going to take it from me. As Brad writhed on the floor, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. But I didn't feel regret, not yet. All I felt was relief. Relief that for the first time, I had stood up for myself. And I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The sound of Brad's screams echoed through the house, but I barely heard it. My blood was pounding in my ears, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else. I stood over him, my chest heaving, every muscle in my body coiled and trembling with the surge of adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so alive, so in control. For the first time in weeks, no, months, I wasn't the victim. Brad lay on the floor, clutching his hand, his face contorted in pain. The once cocky grin that had taunted me was gone, replaced by a look of shock and fear. He hadn't expected this. He thought he could walk into my house, flaunt his so-called superiority, and leave me broken. But now he was the one on the floor, and I wasn't about to let him forget it. "You think you're a tough guy, don't you?" I said, my voice low and menacing as I stared down at him. "You think you can waltz in here, disrespect me, and walk out without consequences?" He groaned, his free hand bracing against the floor as he tried to push himself up. "You're crazy," he hissed through gritted teeth, his arrogance faltering, but still lingering in his tone. "Crazy," I repeated, taking a step closer. "No, Brad. What's crazy is you thinking you could steal my wife, humiliate me, and bully me in my own home. That's crazy." He glared up at me, his bravado struggling to resurface. "She came to me," he spat, his voice shaky but defiant. "She's done with you. Face it, you're just a loser who can't keep his wife happy." That was the spark that reignited the fire inside me. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to his feet. "Say that again," I growled, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Go on, say it." For a moment, he said nothing. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. He was trapped, and he knew it. But Brad, being Brad, he couldn't help himself. He smirked, even through the pain, and said, "She deserves better than you." I snapped. The next few moments were a blur. My fists moved on instinct, striking him with a force I didn't know I had. Years of frustration, heartbreak, and betrayal poured into every punch, every movement. Brad tried to fight back, but his so-called alpha male persona crumbled under the weight of my fury. He wasn't the invincible powerhouse he pretended to be. He was just a man, and I was done being afraid of him. Somewhere in the chaos, he managed to land a weak punch to my side, but it only fueled me further. I grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back, and slammed him against the wall. His cries of pain filled the room, but I didn't let go, not until I felt the sickening crack of bone beneath my grip. He screamed again, louder this time, and collapsed to the floor as I released him. I stood over him, my breathing ragged, my hands shaking from the intensity of the fight. Brad clutched his broken hand, writhing in agony, his once smug demeanor utterly shattered. He wasn't the alpha anymore. He wasn't anything. "You don't get to come into my house and treat me like this," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You don't get to take what's mine and act like you're better than me. Not anymore." He didn't respond. He couldn't. He just lay there, gasping for breath, his body curled in on itself like a beaten dog. For the first time, He looked small, pathetic. The sound of a door creaking behind me broke the intense silence. I turned to see Samantha standing there, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She had heard everything, seen everything. Her gaze flicked from me to Brad, then back to me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked scared. Not a Brad of me. What did you do? She whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. The anger that had driven me moments ago was starting to subside, replaced by a cold, heavy weight in my chest. I looked at Brad one last time, then turned and walked away, leaving them both to deal with the mess they had created. This was far from over, and I knew it. But for now, I had reclaimed something I thought I had lost forever, my dignity. And I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me again. I didn't go far. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I leaned against the counter, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. The man looking back at me was unrecognizable, disheveled, furious, and dangerous. I had just broken another man's hand in a fit of rage. A man who had been brazen enough to steal my wife and mock me in my own home. A man who had it coming. I heard footsteps behind me and didn't have to turn around to know it was Samantha. Her hesitant movements, the way the floor creaked under her weight, gave her away. She was always quieter when she was unsure of herself, like she was trying to tiptoe around a minefield. I didn't bother acknowledging her. I was too busy trying to steady my breathing and decide what came next. What happened back there? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned slowly, my eyes locking onto hers. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in her oversized sweater, her hair disheveled. Her eyes were wide, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, shame, guilt. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. You know exactly what happened, I said, my voice cold and even. Your boyfriend thought he could bully me in my own house. He thought wrong. Her face crumpled at my words. He's not my boyfriend, she stammered. I mean, it wasn't like that. It was a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Sneaking around behind my back for months was a mistake? Inviting him into our house was a mistake? Letting him touch you, kiss you, those were mistakes. She flinched at my words, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice trembling. I was lonely, and he was just there. Lonely, I shot back, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You were lonely? I worked 12-hour days to give you everything you wanted. I trusted you, Samantha, and this is how you repay me? She started crying then, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I messed up. Her tears didn't move me, not this time. I had spent too long being the man who always forgave, always tried to understand, always put someone else's feelings above his own. But now, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. You messed up? I said, my tone dripping with disbelief. That's all you have to say? You didn't just mess up, Samantha. You broke us. You shattered everything we built together. She looked up at me then, her face streaked with tears, her eyes desperate. Please, she begged. Please, let's fix this. I'll do anything. I'll cut Brad out of my life, I swear. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. Just please don't give up on us. Her words hit me like a blow to the chest. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could go back to the way things were. But the other part of me, the part that had watched her betray me over and over again, knew better. How do I forgive this? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. How do I look at you and not see the person who lied to me, who betrayed me, who let another man into our bed, our life? She stepped closer, her hands reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. Please, she whispered. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. Don't let this destroy us. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the woman I used to know, but all I saw was a stranger who had torn my heart out and expected me to piece it back together. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice hollow. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her sobs grew louder, and she sank to her knees, clutching at the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I'll do anything, she cried. Just tell me what to do. I'll fix this, I swear. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. The weight of her betrayal, of everything that had happened, pressed down on me like a lead blanket. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. The woman I once loved was gone, and in her place was someone I barely recognized. "I need time," I said quietly, "and I need you to stay out of my way." Her sobs followed me as I left the kitchen, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the wounds were still so raw, the betrayal still so fresh. For now, I needed space to figure out what came next, and whether Samantha would have any place in it. The next morning, the reality of what had happened the night before started to sink in. The house was eerily quiet. Samantha avoided me, staying locked in the bedroom, and I had no desire to go near her. Brad, on the other hand, had slithered out like the coward he was. I didn't expect him to come back anytime soon, not after the state I'd left him in, but I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent the morning pacing the living room, replaying the fight in my head. My fists were sore, my knuckles bruised, but it wasn't the physical pain that gnawed at me. It was the storm brewing on the horizon. I knew Brad well enough to know he wouldn't just take this lying down. His ego wouldn't let him. He'd want revenge, or at the very least, some kind of recompense for the humiliation he'd suffered. Sure enough, my phone buzzed around noon. It was a text from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakably from Brad. It was short and to the point. "You'll regret this." I stared at the screen, a mix of anger and unease bubbling up inside me. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him stew in his own misery, but I knew better. Brad wasn't the type to back down, and neither was I. If he wanted to escalate this, then so be it. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the police. As I expected, Brad had reported the fight. He claimed I attacked him without provocation, painting himself as the victim. The officer on the other end of the line asked me to come in for a statement, and I agreed. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I knew exactly what had happened, and I had no intention of letting Brad twist the narrative to suit his agenda. At the station, I laid it all out. The months of suspicion, the affair, and Brad's intrusion into my home. I told them about his arrogance, his threats, and how he had tried to provoke me. To my surprise, the officer seemed sympathetic. "Sounds like he's the one who started it," he said, scribbling notes in his pad. "But you did break his hand." I nodded, knowing I couldn't deny it. "I was defending myself," I said. "He pushed me too far." The officer leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. "We'll investigate," he said finally. "But if what you're saying checks out, I don't think you have much to worry about." Still, I left the station with a heavy heart. The thought of a legal battle loomed over me like a dark cloud. But it wasn't just the law I had to contend with. It was the neighborhood. Word of the fight spread faster than I thought possible. By the next day, the entire block was buzzing with gossip. The neighbors who had once adored Brad were now divided. Some of them sided with me, calling Brad out for his arrogance and his blatant disrespect for my marriage. Others, however, whispered behind my back, questioning my actions and whether I had gone too far. Samantha, of course, became the talk of the town. The pitying glances she received whenever she stepped outside only added to her humiliation. And then there were Brad's supporters, a small but vocal group who seemed intent on defending him. They called me unstable, a hothead who couldn't handle his wife's choices. It took everything in me not to confront them, but I knew it wasn't worth it. Let them talk, let them speculate. I had bigger things to focus on. Samantha, for her part, was a shell of her former self. She tried to make amends, offering to talk to the neighbors, to smooth things over, but I shut her down every time. "You've done enough," I told her bluntly. She would just hang her head and retreat back to the bedroom, leaving me to deal with the fallout on my own. As the days passed, I started to notice a shift in the way people treated Brad. His broken hand was a constant reminder of his defeat, and his once boisterous presence in the neighborhood began to fade. He stopped hosting barbecues, stopped revving his car engine in the driveway. He was still there. Of course, his ego wouldn't let him leave, but he was no longer the alpha male he had so desperately tried to be. The legal issue eventually fizzled out. Brad's threats of pressing charges never materialized, likely because he knew his own behavior wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. The police closed the case with a simple warning for both of us to stay away from each other. It wasn't a victory, exactly, but it felt like one. As for the neighborhood, the gossip eventually died down, replaced by the next scandal or drama. But the damage had been done. My marriage was in tatters, my trust in Samantha shattered, and my reputation irreparably changed. Yet, in a strange way, I felt lighter. I had faced the storm and survived, and as I stood on my porch one evening, watching Brad limp into his house with his arm in a sling, I realized something important. I wasn't the weak, naive man he had thought I was. Not anymore. In the days that followed, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The storm that had consumed my life, Brad, Samantha, the betrayal, had left its mark. But it hadn't destroyed me. If anything, it had stripped away the illusions, forcing me to confront the truth about my marriage, my choices, and myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was ready to take control. The house, once a symbol of the life Samantha and I had built together, now felt like a battlefield. Every corner, every piece of furniture, was a reminder of what had happened. But instead of letting it weigh me down, I decided to reclaim it. I started with the living room, rearranging the furniture, painting the walls a fresh shade of blue. It was a small act, but it felt like a declaration. This is mine now. Samantha, to her credit, tried to make amends. She lingered around the house, offering apologies and empty promises. But I had already made up my mind. The trust between us was gone, and without trust, there was nothing left to salvage. One evening, as she sat across from me at the dining table, I told her it was over. "We can't fix this," I said, my voice steady. "Too much has happened. Too much has been broken." She didn't argue. Maybe she knew it was futile, or maybe she was too exhausted to fight. Either way, she simply nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. They didn't change anything. The divorce process was surprisingly smooth. Samantha didn't contest my terms, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because she didn't want to drag things out. I kept the house, and she moved in with her sister in another part of town. The day she left, I stood in the doorway, watching her carry the last of her things to her car. She glanced back at me once, her face a mix of regret and sadness, but I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. With Samantha gone, the house felt quieter than ever. But instead of feeling lonely, I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to please someone who would never truly appreciate me. I could focus on myself, on what I wanted, on who I wanted to be. I started small, rediscovering hobbies I had neglected over the years. I picked up my old guitar, the strings dusty but still intact, and spent hours strumming away in the evenings. I went for long walks around the neighborhood, not caring if the neighbors whispered about me. Let them talk. I had nothing to prove to anyone. Work, too, became a source of solace. I threw myself into my projects, finding satisfaction in the steady rhythm of my job. But I didn't let it consume me the way it had before. I realized now that life was more than just work and sacrifice. It was about balance, about finding joy in the little things. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I stumbled across an old box of photos. Most of them were from the early years of my marriage, back when Samantha and I were happy, or at least when I thought we were. I sat on the floor, sifting through the pictures, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I felt a strange sense of closure. Those memories were part of my life, part of my story, but they didn't define me. I could look at them without letting them control me. As the weeks turned into months, I started to rebuild, not just the house, but myself. I joined a gym, not to impress anyone, but to feel stronger, more confident. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from over the years, and slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. Brad, meanwhile, faded into the background. His broken hand and bruised ego kept him,